So we're talking about agents, and to do a sort of extremely simplified overview, AI agents are kind of a step beyond chatbots, like ChatGPT, in the sense that they can actually do things for us. So they can actually take actions autonomously, so without intervention from humans, and entirely on their own. So George,
I called them synthetics at one point, and I got a lot of flack for that. So I'll try to avoid that this time around.
Well, that's one of the things about agents. There's sort of not a widely agreed upon definition, nor verbiage. Okay, whether synthetics, agents, bots.
Good.
Tell us a little bit about what Grindr is, and then what your vision for AI agents is.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me here, and good to have this conversation. Grindr is the application that the vast majority of gay and bi men in the world use to connect to each other. It brings together about 14 million people around the world in 190 countries. There are very few places where we don't actually operate. Initially started out as a casual connections and dating product, and over time has expanded to be a lot more. Basically, the connective tissue for gay people around the world. And now we're a public company. We've been public for about 2 years, I think, coming up 23 months now. We've had a really good run as a public company, and a lot more to do in the future.
So agents, how are they going to transform dating? How are they going to transform even aspects of our lives beyond dating?
Yeah, I had built an AI company prior to joining Grindr in 2022. As one of the things I've done, I've been building companies for a long time now. And so for me, when they approached me about this opportunity, AI was at the forefront because Grindr has a lot of data and has a user base that's very connected to the product. People spend over an hour in the app a day, which is fairly remarkable when you think about it. And so I thought there was a ton of opportunity for AI. And the really big takeaway happened for me when I realized that all these use cases that we want to expand into might complicate the app, because the app today is really simple. But if you built them with AI-first approach, you can actually avoid that. Mm-hmm. Because if the AI can guess the direction you want to go into and then kind of direct you in that way as you're surfing through the product, then you're not putting a lot of additional kind of buttons and places for people to go, but rather directing them in that direction.
Yeah.
And so we want to add a bunch of use cases to the product because people use us in so many different ways, and we don't always have features for the things that people do in the app. But we want it to be very non-intrusive in people's behavior, and I think AI can make that happen in a really good way.
So what were some of the things that you wanted to build before introducing or planning to introduce the Wingman that it now kind of brings together?
The biggest one is around dating. So when Grindr was started nearly 16 years ago, dating for long-term purposes was not as big of a deal for most gay men. Now, since then, obviously, gay marriage has become fully accepted, and a lot more people are thinking about, hey, I want to settle down into a long-term relationship. And so we don't really have features to enable people to find long-term partners. Now, a lot of people still do. 4 in 10 relationships among gay men in the US originate on Grindr. But it is all kind of done through chatting. People start talking, and then that leads into whatever direction it leads into. We want to actually make it easier for you to find a partner and be able to match you with the right people. There's a way to do that through current technology, which is mostly for filtering, or there's an AI-first approach to do it where we can actually guess what you want based on your behavior patterns, based on what you're speaking to people about, and understand you a lot better, obviously always with user consent. And that's something that AI can make a much better experience with and probably bring together people in a much more transparent way. Mm-hmm. Because today, you can be on, say, Tinder and be matched, right? But you have no idea why you were matched. And I think that's a huge deterrent to people. And if we could be transparent about, hey, this is what we learned about you based on your chat history, for example, and based on that information plus somebody else's information that's similar, we brought you together, that's a way more compelling proposition, I think.
So what about the kind of agentic parts where the agent, some point in the near-term future, can actually do things for us? Is it AI agents dating other AI agents at some point?
Well, I don't know about dating, but at least starting a conversation, right? I mean, already, even before Gen AI, through heuristics, you had applications out there would suggest text right to you, like, hey, this is how you should respond. And initially, it was on the more like the enterprise side. Mm-hmm. The user would be writing, and then the customer service agent would actually get recommendations of what to say. So there's no reason why that couldn't happen on a user base level.
Right.
I mean, I think it's kind of like, how do I start this conversation? What should I say? I mean, it's a very simple thing that an agent should be able to do for you, and I think will. But the more ideal version of that would be not just like general, hey, these are the things you could use to start with, but rather based on how you normally talk and what you normally say, and what I know about the person you're about to chat with, here's suggested language. And that's far more compelling than just a general set of ideas of what you could say. The next kind of batch of that to me would be, okay, you guys are talking about going out to get coffee. How about here are 3 places where you could go get coffee in between where that person's located and where you're located, right? Because Grindr is very location-based. That's actually pretty convenient as well. And then the eventual step, yes, some people will choose to do this, some won't. We very much believe in not forcing people to do anything. They should decide on their own which direction they want to go into. But for those that do choose to do this, there's no reason why some of the initial conversations and kind of validation can happen through AI talking to AI, right? So I have a replica of myself, you have a replica of yourself, and those two talk to each other.
We could be doing this panel via our AI agents.
There you go. Well, my husband likes to joke every time I have an earnings call, and after earnings call, we then have to do a lot of like follow-on calls. He's like, when is there going to be an AI that you can just press the button and answer the question? Because all the questions are usually the same, right? Like I get asked the same questions by 20 investors over 2 days. And so I'm not saying that's actually going to happen, but there is no reason why we cannot better match you with an AI talking to an AI, and then you get to get an output of that information and say, hey, this is what we talked about. This is why we think it's a good idea.
Yep.
Now, and then move on from that. Now, there's still stuff that, I mean, promise here is massive, and in 5 years, a lot of what we believe might be possible today will either be possible or be proven to not work.
Right.
But the models today still can't do some very basic things that human beings take absolutely for granted. And so I was going through this with, I have an AI coach, and so kind of going through this.
Is this a person or an agent?
No, it's a person. It's a very advanced engineer who helps me understand what is possible and not possible in models and so forth, because I'm not an expert in that stuff as much. And so we were walking through some examples, and like, if you are in a conversation and you say, are you interested in sushi? Now, what do you mean by that, right? Like, do you mean by that are you interested in sushi now, or are you just generally interested in sushi? So that's something that a human will think about, but an LLM can't yet figure out. So then a human might respond in a very, generic way, as a lot of people do, like, I'm not interested in sushi. On the other side now, you're reading that as like, this person's not interested in sushi at all, or they're not interested in sushi right now, because maybe I asked that question in such an obtuse way on purpose, because I didn't want to like, be so direct about the fact that we should go get sushi now, and I thought maybe he'll respond to me in some other way, which then allow me to actually suggest a date today. And that kind of an engagement that a person is going through in terms of like what exactly I'm saying, and I'm purposely not being that clear. Yeah, exactly. An LLM can't yet do. Now, they're not the models that are being developed right now, but probably like 2 models after, they should be able to do that. And that's when I think a lot of this like agent can function on its own will become a lot more possible than it's possible today.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Let's talk a little bit about how you're actually building the Wingman. What you've said is that in 3 years' time, you expect the Wingman to be fully rolled out to your users. And that's actually pretty conservative. You expect to have it rolled out sooner than that.
Yeah, but I've learned, this is the second time I'm running a public company, that you need to under-promise and over-deliver. Because as a public company, you can be really punished if you promise things too soon.
Okay, so how are you actually going about building the Wingman? What's the underlying model?
Well, on my phone, I have a Wingman, actually, which I can be talking to right now. And there are about a dozen people who are not Grindr employees who also have it today on their phones, and they're giving us feedback. It's all done under NDA, and they're not allowed to share any screenshots of it. For better or for worse, Grindr gets a lot of attention. I mean, like we sneeze, and suddenly it's like, we have some awful disease, right? Or not, and there's a lot of reasons for why, and some of it is good and some of it is bad, but we need to be really careful, because the kind of attention we get out of a small hallucination information could be really damaging. And so we want to try to break the model as much as possible at this stage. That's why it's in the hands of so few people, and we're going to continue doing that probably for at least 12 months. Like, I wouldn't expect to put it into a lot of people's hands without this NDA model for quite some time, so that we can make sure that some of the more kind of flashy stories that might come out of it, which every model out there is going to do, don't happen to us. And so I have a Wingman right now on my phone. I can ask it questions, and it will answer those questions. And questions could be anything from like, I've never had intercourse with a man before, like, what should I be aware of? Which is like not a totally unreasonable question for a lot of Grindr users to have, because guess what? In a lot of parts of the world, sexual information is not actually that accessible, especially for same-sex people, or people who are interested in same-sex relationships. Grindr is oftentimes the sole source of information for that, because we maintain a big database of sexual health information. So, instead of you going to go read like stories about it, why not ask the Wingman and it tells you what to do? To like, I'm listening to this piece of music, like, I really like it. Can you suggest other songs that are similar to that, right? So that already is possible for some people to use on Grindr, and Wingman is already doing things like that. We're going to continue to kind of perfect it and make it a lot better, and then over time, try to build very concrete and specific use cases to see how people want to use it. Okay. I think the way Facebook has gone about releasing its LLM into people's hands is actually really smart. In that it's kind of, I don't know if you guys have seen it, but whether you're on Instagram or on Facebook or on WhatsApp, they have a little circular button, and you kind of can click on that and ask it questions. And so what they, I think, are testing is like, what kind of questions will people actually even ask, right? The answer is important, but maybe not as important as learning what do people want to do with it, because none of us know, right? I built a mobile company in 2006, 07, 08. On Blackberries. We put apps on BlackBerry, which was very uncommon to do back then. It was a way to book taxi cabs and to pay for taxi cabs. We went into this very much thinking the problem we're solving is paying for taxis and electronic receipts, because taxi receipts are a huge source of fraud in expense management, and that's the problem we wanted to solve. Turned out users actually didn't care about paying for cabs with your mobile phone, but they really loved the idea of being able to book a taxi on your phone. So our assumption of what people would want was totally thrown out of the window, and this extra thing we built purely to enable the payment was actually the thing that made the company work. And then we ended up being one of the first apps on an iPhone as well, and we're an iPhone commercials back in the early days, et cetera. So you can have as good of a hypothesis as you want about what users will want, but more often than not, you'll be wrong, and users will use that in a different way. And so I think for us, and for any company, frankly, that's just trying to be at the forefront of using some of this AI technology for productization in a consumer-friendly way, you should not make assumption that you have the answer. Just put it out there in a way that you can actually learn from users what they want to do, and then invest more in that. And that's going to be our approach.
But that actually sounds really difficult, right?
Yeah.
The common saying is you're trying to build or fix like a jet plane while you're flying it. That's kind of this, but exponentially more difficult, because the technology, the plane itself, is also changing in flight.
Well, I would say maybe we're trying to add a really nice new version of a first-class seat to a plane while it's flying. Maybe I'll kind of word it that way.
Sure.
Because there's nothing to fix, right? We're just trying to innovate in a really good way.
But as leading your company and also providing direction to your product leaders, to your engineers, how do you sort of find that balance between setting a big picture vision for them and also kind of telling them, while they're on the ground building this stuff, here's what you should do? It's
really interesting and complicated. It's going to bear with me as I answer this question, because it's something I've had to deal with for the last 18 months, quite a bit actually. So I think we had a vision for what we want the Wingman to do in a holistic sense for quite some time. Like, we want to do all these things, let's get there as quickly as possible. And that's kind of at the level that we operate, and then we kind of gave it to PMs to like go figure it out. But there's no such thing as an AI PM. I mean, that's like all like totally brand new, right? Like everyone's just kind of learning the same way that in 2008 there was no such thing as an iOS engineer. I remember in my company, Taxi Magic back then, we had this front end engineer who was really good, and we're like, hey Nick, do you want to go learn how to code for iOS? And he's like, sure. And like, okay, now you're the iOS engineer. So there's a little bit of that going on here with like, what is an AI product manager? I think the initial guidance of this like very big vision actually created confusion for the team, and they tried to go after the whole thing when it's actually not chewable. And the way, it took me some time to like figure out that was what was going on, and it was actually really slowing us down because we're trying to solve a problem that's actually not solvable today with today's technology. It's going to be solvable in 3 years, et cetera, but not today, and yet we're trying to like do it now. And that's actually a big reason why I then got this AI tutor to like help me learn the tech well enough to be able to actually like help them chew off smaller bites and understand what might be a way to get from here to there in reasonable steps that actually can give people results sooner. And so I do think that in this sense, more direction from the top is probably more necessary than not,
right,
because there's so much newness here. And ultimately, whether it's a CEO or a founder or CTO or whatever, whose vision is being implemented, probably needs to be more deeply involved in the product than you might be on a regular basis. So that's something I've been doing. It's, I think, something that our chief product officer is doing as well, kind of try to be a little bit more directive and, I think kind of clear about what result do we want to achieve now.
Yeah. So by the same token, how are you also thinking about the risks? So what kind of keeps you up at night when you're thinking about the ways in which the Wingman could go awry or could hallucinate or tell users, when they're seeking information they might not know, sexual information, it could lead them in the wrong direction. There's also questions about liability. So are you responsible in that instance? Data privacy is incredibly important to your users. The risk of a cybersecurity breach. And also prompt engineering, the same sort of like prompt injections that can be applied to LLMs now could also be applied to agents. I could go on, but how are you thinking about all of this?
Yeah, I mean, it's really complicated, and I think everything in life is a measured risk, right? Like you have to measure risk with potential reward and how much risk are you willing to take. I'm probably more on the higher risk tolerance levels than most people. I've started 3 companies and taken them to something, and most people wouldn't even choose to do one. And for me, like, it's totally normal to do this. So my risk tolerance is pretty high. That's actually a big reason why I think big enterprises usually get kind of challenged by startups, is because they're not willing to take the risk. So the biggest risk we face actually is to do nothing. The same way that there were many products for people to meet each other prior to Grindr existing. There were web-based products only. And then the iPhone came out, and there was a platform shift happening, and those companies chose not to move to the mobile platform, gave Grindr a huge opening. Well, those companies don't exist anymore, and Grindr has the market share that they gained from them, because gay men were online way before anybody else was in practice. That's the biggest risk, right? Like, we don't actually innovate, and then someone comes out and does something that is AI first, and suddenly we are then trying to compete with them. So that would be, I think, actually the single biggest risk. But in getting from where we are now to where we want to go, obviously privacy is critical, and we are extremely privacy first. We actually get challenged a lot about, like, why don't you ask for ID verification? Why don't you ask for a photo from a person that's a face verified photo? Well, the reason is because a lot of people still don't have the luxury to be as open about who they are as we would like them to be, and the world that we want them to live in. And that's not just true in countries where it's illegal to be gay, or maybe not illegal but very difficult to be gay. It's actually true even here in the United States. 30% of our users are actively choosing to be discreet, right? And so we need to be extremely careful with their privacy information, because it's not a matter of like, oh, suddenly there's a breach. It's actually a matter of like, is there a life potentially at risk, et cetera? And so privacy is really critical, and we are very privacy forward. We just released a new privacy policy recently, which users have to actively accept, that allows us to use data inside the app to train the model. So far, we've not done that, and we'll only do that with user consent. And ultimately, a lot of what we'll be doing with AI will be based on user choice. It will not be, hey, here's a product, you must use it this way, right? It'll be, this is available to you. If you'd like to use it, you can, but you don't have to if you don't want to, and because that is really critical. Secondly, I think it's really important to chew off what you can actually kind of eat in any given moment, and so don't try to do something that's too much. Kind of do it in chunks and see what the results are with it on all fronts, and then do more. So that's going to be our approach. That's partly why we're being so careful and who gets access to this technology from us quickly, which probably slows us down a little bit, but I think is a better outcome eventually at the end. But again, I think for me, our users deserve to have a product that's not just good for among the other products that they use for something like this within the community, but actually totally deserve to have the very best product you can have in the world.
Okay.
And that's the kind of company I want us to be, right? Like, we are the second gay company to be public ever. The other one's not public anymore, so the only gay company, meaning like a company that serves.
Who was the first?
Planet Out, back in the kind of first tech bubble period in 2000, 2001. And so like, I think for us, we have a little bit of a responsibility to be successful and not just like okay successful, but exceptionally successful. Because if we do that, we change people's perceptions about gay people around the world, and that's really, really beneficial. And so I want us to be the very best product, not just because I want our users to have the very best product, because I want that to send a message, hey, look at what's possible. Mm-hmm. The same way that Martina Navratilova becoming an amazing tennis player in the 1980s and 1990s forced people to change their perceptions of what it was to be gay and helped make it much more acceptable to people. I think Grindr being really, really successful will force people to think about what it's like to be gay and force acceptance in a better way, right?
And also being the first major dating app to talk about having an AI agent. So you're kind of setting the bar in technology.
Hopefully. I mean, actually, everyone's going to talk about it and is going to do something.
Eventually,
so yeah,
yes.
That's not why I'm talking about it. I'm talking about it because actually I want to get people used to the fact of where we want to go. One of the reasons to talk about this stuff in advance is so that when it happens, users are not as surprised that, hey, this is the direction that you're going into. But my point is, I think we have a responsibility to build a really amazing product that releases the full potential of what we can be for users. And that's a big reason why I think it's important for us to be at the forefront of this.
All right. So I think we have time for just one or two questions from the audience here. Well, I have plenty more questions for you, George. So when we talked about the sort of risks, you'd said that you can't afford not to make the big bets in technology, and also that you're asking user privacy, or you're asking users if they want to consent to this up front. You're being very proactive. Yep. But still, how do you think about liability? Are your investors concerned about what AI could do, where it might mess up?
I think the biggest risk on the messing up, at least that I can imagine right now, is around hallucinations, whether, and we can have liability protections on that, and we will obviously, but nevertheless, AI says something that it's not supposed to say, or that's not good to say. Then there's like screenshots about that. Then someone tweets about it, and then it kind of takes over. I mean, I don't know if people saw, but like a parody site during the Republican National Convention had this little story up saying, Grindr usage is up 30% or something in Milwaukee, and literally 200 million views of that video took place in 3 days. So like, I mean, I don't know how much brand marketing would have like how many dollars you'd have to spend to get that kind of brand marketing, but that happens all the time. So I can imagine how a hallucination, like imagery, could be really negative. And so that we have to be really careful about that, and we are, and we put a lot of protections in place to try to manage for that, but it'll still break, and we just need to be prepared for that. And then secondly, it could lead people to do something that they're not supposed to do themselves, right? Because it messaged something. But again, ultimately, users have to be responsible for their own lives, right? I get into my Tesla at my house every day, and literally right out of the garage, I turn on self-driving, and it drives me to the office. And there's one place where I have to intervene, and that's the only one where I intervene, and otherwise it drives itself. But I'm taking on that liability, and that's my choice to do that. You have the alternative.
So if you get lost, you're not blaming Elon.
No, I'm not blaming Elon. And also, if I get into an accident, I'm not blaming Elon. That's on me. On the flip side, you could take the approach that Waymo has taken, which is like, we're going to make this absolutely perfect before it's in users' hands. That's too risky. I don't know if you'll ever kind of get there, and frankly, whether it's going to be economical or not. I think.
So we're almost out of time, so let me just end on a quick one. What are some takeaways for the enterprise? I know you're building for a consumer audience, but in being a company that's sort of at the forefront of talking about agentic technology now, what have you learned so far that can be applicable to any company?
Well, I think for enterprise, I think the bigger question is around how are you going to use all this capability to make your teams a lot more productive. And I
you
think
may be using these technologies inside your own organization
exactly.
as well.
Like, I mean, I think engineers in 3 years are going to be, on average, 2x more productive than they are today. And that's going to have massive implications for our workforce and how we work. And I don't think we're grappling with that almost at all. Because there's days coming when you actually won't really need a lot of junior engineers. I'm not saying you won't want them. You still will want them because you cannot have senior engineers without junior engineers because somehow people have to grow up to be senior engineers. But there's going to be a period of time when you have a lot of senior engineers and then they could just be supported by a bunch of AI to do what the junior engineer does. And that's going to make companies way more productive and way more profitable. And how we deal with that, I don't think we're in any way prepared for yet.